Hi, and welcome to another episode of the show talktotaiwo, and I'm your host Adeyemi Taiwo Uni. Today on the show, we're going to be talking about teaching sex education. I've got a child's rights activist with me in the studio, and together we're going to explore this topic together. Hi, Ibukunoluwa. Thanks for joining on the show today. How are you?
Thank you. I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Finally.
Yeah, finally. So please, I want you to just do an introduction of yourself before we get into the conversation.
Okay. I am Ibukunoluwa. I'm the Executive Director, Hope for Second Chance Foundation, HOSEC for short. HOSEC is an organization that responds to child protection concerns. We work to prevent by, of course, increasing the knowledge that people have. And where there are violations of the rights of the child, we do all that we can to respond to that, ensuring that the child gets all the care, of course, first to prevent continuity of the violation and to ensure that the child is stabilized post, the violation that occurs. We also work to ensure that justice takes its course. So that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ibukunoluwa. So, before you have an NGO, before you are a child's rights activist, you are first a parent, right? And
Yeah.
so, I just want to know, what is sex education?
Okay. And then permit me, I rather child rights advocates than the activists. A lot of
Oh,
people when they hear activists, they think, oh, all we do is fight. So, child rights advocates suits me more. All right.
all right,
So,
great.
of course, I'm an African, and so because you said before, the being a child rights advocate, talking about it from the context of a parent. Sex education is the education that we give to our children as regards sex. Unfortunately, in this climate, we assume that sex education is basically how and the process of having sex, and all that happens. But sexuality education goes beyond that. Like if it is not comprehensive, the truth about it is then it's not education. So because it includes emotions, it includes responsibilities, it includes the anatomy, of course, it has to do with sexual relationship, that two people have. But before you get to that, it talks about the body, it talks about the moods, the feelings, the behaviors of the person, even before whatever sexual relationship occurs. So as a parent, all that we give to our children, as it were, in terms of instructions on how to respond, how to understand, interpret their bodies, and how to respond to stimulus, as it were, sexual stimulus that comes to them, is what sexuality education is. It has to be all encompassing, emotions, the anatomy. We usually just leave it on the anatomy, we stay there. It has to do with knowing your body part, but it goes beyond that. And I think that's one of the reasons why, of course, we're still having the issues that we're having. I'm sure we'll get into that as we go on in the course of the discussion. So basically, sex education has to do with understanding human sexuality. And you cannot remove the personality of the person from the sexual life or the sexuality of the person. So it's understanding your body, it's helping your child understand how his or her body works or responds, the emotions that they have per time, and how to respond to that emotions and the responsibilities that come with the emotions that they have.
Wow, thank you. Amazingly, in this episode, I'm not going to be talking too much because apparently I'm not a parent yet. So I'm just going to give you the opportunity to just teach me and teach us. So having to understand that sex education doesn't just have to do with the anatomy; it goes way
Yeah.
beyond it. Now,
Yes.
what is there an appropriate age for children to learn about sex education?
Okay, so education in itself has age appropriateness, and that's why you don't teach the same thing to a primary one or a grade 1 year or one student. You don't teach what you teach in grade 5. You don't teach it in grade 1, even though it might be the same thing. For instance, plus additions, subtractions is the same thing, basically, same formula, same principles. But you have different approaches, to doing the additions. And so in the grade one, how you teach addition, usually you bring objects that they can identify, you bring symbols to teach addition. And then as they grow into grade two, grade three, then you begin to do word problems. It's still addition or subtraction that you're teaching. So education itself has age appropriateness, and the same thing with sexuality education. There is age appropriateness. If it is not age appropriate, then it becomes child sexual abuse. It actually becomes abuse because that's exposing the child to content that the child should not have. So, what age should you begin to? What is the appropriate age in this context where our children have their childhood dashed? I believe that as soon as your child can communicate with you, then your child can have sexuality education. Remember that what we have said is age appropriate. So it means that what you teach a 1 year old or a 2 year old child is not the same thing that you teach an adolescent. So at the early stages, of course, understanding their body, their anatomy, basically it might just be where you will stop, knowing, oh, this is their body parts, knowing that, oh, boys have this part and girls have this part, and knowing that their body parts are private to them and no persons have rights or access to touch them inappropriately. That's that sexuality education that is appropriate for that age bracket. And then as they grow up, then you then increase it. So age appropriateness is key. And as soon as your child is able to communicate with you, then you can start sexuality education with your child.
Hmm, awesome. I'm trying to ask several questions, but at the same time, I'm trying to be a little bit conservative because I don't know if I have the skills. I don't know if bold enough to talk about these things now because when we get further in the conversation, probably you're going to know why. So moving forward, we are Africans, and
Yeah.
there are a lot of questions that African parents need to ask or probably have not been asking rightly. So I just want to know, do you think that African parents have been conservative about the subject of sexuality, giving it to children at different ages?
I think one of the reasons why we're where we are is because there's been a lot of mystery around sex, and we
Mm,
need to demystify it, so that our children can talk to us, so that we can protect our children, so that we can guide our children properly. There's too much ush ush really about it. And the reality is, it's almost as if we're hypocrites because all of us, those of us that are married, engage in these things. Aside that, we watch it. We hear these things in our musical videos that you have littering us everywhere. So it's like literally everywhere you turn to, you have sex content. Either it's in an advert. There was a time someone said to me that it's almost as if you do not have a female almost naked or suggestive in an ad of any product, it won't sell. Because
mm,
even products that have nothing, absolutely nothing to do with women, as it were, you still have somewhere some lady coming in and being suggestive in her stance or in her pose or something. So it's I think it's disillusional if we continue to go about in osh osh when it comes to this. So a lot of African parents, in fact, all African parents, with all due respect, have been too quiet as regards the subject of sex, and that's why our children have been misinformed. Because children, as they grow, want to know. And so, if you're not giving them the right information, if you're not giving them that information, they will seek that information elsewhere. And
mm-hmm.
we're in a period of time where you have wrong information littered everywhere. And so our parents have been too silent, too quiet. They brought us up also pretty quiet. It's just that, of course, realities of what's on ground is making a lot of noise. We have to be able we have to speak about it. So conservative around sex, I think it's important that we demystify it.
I want to know, do you think that African parents have been conservative on the subject of sex education?
Well, I believe that there's been a lot of hush, if I can use that word, around sex, and there is need for us to demystify it. There's so much big deal, so much secrecy around it, and that's making our children vulnerable in the sense that they can't even talk to us about it. They can't talk to us about their bodies. They can't talk to us about the emotions that they feel. They can't they can't even say anything about sex. And so yes, African parents have been too conservative when it comes to sexuality education or comes to sex. And it's almost living in self denial because the reality today is everywhere you turn, you find sex. And
Mm.
that's unfortunate reality. In the music videos that we find littering around on the social media, even on the conventional media, you find sex. There is almost no advert, as it were, that there is either no sex, either quite explicit, or you have it as an insinuation, one way or the other, without, of course, mentioning names at this point. So, African parents have been too hushed around sex. And I think that's one of the reasons why we are where we are today. To even, when I gave the definition of sexuality education, I talked about the fact that it's not just the anatomy. You talk about emotions, you talk about responsibilities and all that. Now, let's even face the anatomies. African parents in most places or climes find it difficult to even call body parts what they are.
Hmm.
So because of that secrecy, as it were, around sex, it becomes a problem to talk about the breast or to talk about the penis or the vagina. But for crying out loud, they have body parts, and they, for some of them, they have functions other than sexual relationship. So we need to get to the point where we can demystify sex. And so that when there are concerns, our children are free enough to come to us and ask us questions. And who are we even deceiving? The social media is there with
Hmm.
wrong information. So if you are not telling your child will find information somewhere else. And children talk, they share information among themselves. So if you're not telling your child about it, some other child that either stumbles on it accidentally is going to have a conversation with your child. So one way or the other, your child gets to know about it. Tell me one song in Africa now. Let me bring it to Nigeria. In Nigeria now, there's a hip hop song that does not have sex content. By the
Hmm.
time you begin to count, I'm sure it will be difficult to count five or let's even say 10. Let me not do five. It will be very, very difficult. So I believe that African parents need to speak more about it, understand that sexuality education goes beyond just anatomy, and that sex is a word. It's a word that talks about, of course, sexual relationship, but it's also a word that we use to talk about gender. We also talk about that. And because there's so much ush around it, it's even a problem to say, oh, what's your sex? And
Hmm.
when you say what's your sex, what comes to your mind? Whoever you're saying that to in Africa will probably look at you and like, seriously, what are you saying? But I just want to know, are you male or female? But you can't go about asking that question. So reality is, yes, we need to demystify sex and remove all the big deal that we put about around it. And that's the same reason why our adolescents, want to taste it or want to try, because there's so much there's so much big deal that we've put to it.
Hmm. All right. Interesting. Thank you so much for that. Now, having getting to understand that though African parents have been conservative about it, I think that the real issue in parenthood has been whose role it is to talk about sex education with children. So whose active role do you think it is? Because I know in psychology there is a child
Um,
at phallic stage, okay, has where the female is closer to the father and the male is closer to the mother. That's the
oh my
Oedipus and the electoral complexes. So whose role
God.
is it to talk about sex to the children?
Okay, so the first question I would ask is, and maybe at this point I begin to shake some tables, if I'm permitted. Okay, so whose role is it to parent the child or to
Mm,
nurture the child? Can one
both roles, I guess.
person, both, can one person birth a child? It takes two. Whether you do surrogacy or you do insemination or you, however way you want to do it, it takes two persons. You know, you need the egg and the sperm before you can have a child. So I find it very difficult to then understand when the role or the responsibility of nurturing one of the child is placed on one. So whose role is it to teach sex education? Both parents, because that's the truth about it. We talked about the Oedipus and the Electra complex. A child that has a proper childhood must have that resolve itself. As the child grows to the next stage, I think that's supposed to be the latency stage, then it resolves. And then you now see that the females, of course, are they tend towards the mother, and then the boys tend towards the father, and they have, oh, it's girls thing, and then it's boys thing. The boys are doing their thing and the girls are doing their thing. So sexuality, as it were, talks about beyond just the relationship. It talks about emotions, it talks about responsibilities. And if it talks about it, it brings two persons into the picture. So there is always the female angle to it, and there is always the male angle to it. I'll cite an example. So, my son, I have a son that's about 8 years. I think it was about 5 then. Woke up one morning and asked me, "Mommy, why does my penny stand every morning?" you know
Whoa.
that question hit me. You wake up first in the morning and your son, that's a question you start your day with. Of course, I told him that, from my understanding, yeah, because you're just waking up, there's a lot of blood rush to your penis, and that's why it stands, or that's why it's erect. But I understand that that answer might not be sufficient because I am not a man. I don't have a penis. And so I'm sure that there would be other feelings that come with the turgidity that he experiences in the morning for him to come and ask me about it. So there is no way that my answer will be sufficient. And so I had to bring the dad in to supplement the answer that I'd given to him. And that's the same thing with the girl. So sexuality education has to be done by both parents. There is a part of it that comes from the father, there is a part of it that comes from the mother. And like we say, age appropriateness becomes key at this point. So at the elementary stage, where it's just their body parts, both parents can actually talk to them about their body parts. And then as they grow and grow into stages, for instance, where the boys get to the preteen stage, where they begin to have wet dreams, then you need the man to come in at that point to talk about it, because you can talk so much about what you don't have, what you don't feel. And so as the girl also gets to pre-puberty, of course you need the mother to come in and take charge at that point. Now, even at that, there is boy-girl relationship. So you still need the father to come in and talk to the girl about relationship, and then you need the mother to do the same thing with the boy. So the long and short of what I'm saying is that talk to their children or to give sexuality education to their children. It's not the role of one parent. Both parents must come together on this. So there's reinforcement, there is complementation. where need is.
Mm. You just nailed me when you asked me directly whose role is it to parent. So
It
when parents understand that it is not an individual role, it is a collective
No,
role,
it's
first
not the
to parent.
prerogative of the mother.
Exactly. So it's also imperative to understand that sexuality education is the role of both parents. Now, talking
Yeah.
about age appropriateness, I know we've mentioned it earlier, but I just want to still further reiterate that question. What age is appropriate for different sex education? I know that we talked about the anatomy, we talked about the emotions, but are there ages to stick? Are there ages that should accompany each of these training?
Okay. So, of course, yes. Now, but that you have to balance and assume that your child does not get the information from somewhere else. If you're lucky enough and your child gets the information before the supposed appropriate age, you need to, they means you fast forward and clarify and bring the information. But all things being equal, what we say is between the 0 to 5, your child is okay with just knowing the anatomy. Okay, your breast is your breast, your penis is your penis. You have private parts just as you have other parts. Why are they private parts? They're private part because they belong to you. They are covered, and because they are yours, you have to protect them. And then people don't just have access to it. Nobody should touch you inappropriately. All of that is okay within the 0 to 5 age bracket. Now, where questions like, mommy, how are babies made? Or where do babies come from? Please, let's try as much as possible to remove the babies come from heaven. Because a lot of times, yes, our children then think that, oh, mommy does not know. Because when you say babies come from heaven, and he or she gets information that no, babies don't actually come from heaven. I'll cite an example. So again, with my son, and I'm sure he's going to come and say, "Oh, mommy, you talked about me again." Okay, so he came home one day and asked and said that I now know how babies are made. You can imagine my
Whoa.
okay, so the babies come from the penis, and the man gives it to the woman, and the woman births it from her stomach.
I'm shocked.
I choke. Literally. So I said to myself, okay, so we need to fast forward our
Hmm.
conversation. We need to bring it up. Now, but otherwise, of course, 0 to 5, their body part is good. So when they ask you that, oh, mommy, where do babies come from? Well, babies either come from the vagina, they stay in the uterus, and when it's time, mommy pushes the baby out through the vagina or from the stomach. There's nothing, there's no big deal about that. That's life. It's biology. It's what happens. And that doesn't mean that, of course, whether or not you tell them that, your child will still try to stuff pillow or something in the stomach and act pregnant, because they see pregnant women, especially for those of them that now have younger ones that witness you go through the pregnancy of their siblings. So they know that, oh, at a time mommy's stomach is big and all of that. So as your child grows, you leave it at that. But then when they ask you questions, like I said, you then have to answer them. It's okay for you to say, oh, when you're older, you understand that. So it's fine for you to answer them. But when children ask questions, even if they are questions you don't know, don't shout them down. Don't dasagidi, permit my Yoruba, meaning walk it out. Don't what kind of question is that? And then you leave it. You've not answered the question. And the truth is, your child will still find answer one way or the other. So if you
Because there's
don't
an
know how to go about,
inquisitiveness.
yes, if you don't know how to go about answering that question without exposing too much, you can say, oh, okay, we'll talk about this tomorrow. And you go and find how to how to present it to your child. Now, before your child hits adolescence, it's very important that you begin to talk to your children about emotions, about, um, of course, for the boys, they begin to have their wet dreams at that point. They need to understand how their body works. They need to understand that they will be attracted to some guy. They need to understand the concept of love. They need to understand the concept of having butterflies in their stomach, or seeing somebody and, and feeling somehow in their vagina or in their penis. They need to know that, so that when it happens to them, they are not in shock. They realize that, oh, mommy has said this to me, so it won't be such a big deal for them to come and ask you about it if they're having troubles with it. Until you when you talk about sexuality education and talk about emotions, you also talk about responsibilities. So that's the point where you talk to them about responsibilities. And okay, the fact that you're hungry does not mean that you steal because you're hungry. So there are responsibilities that come with, some having sex. Of course, don't forget that you're talking to adolescents at that point. If you
Mm.
want to become a father, it distract. Then, so you give them a reason that they can understand why they shouldn't engage in it. Not that, oh, they become bad, they go to hellfire, or their destinies are destroyed and all
Oh
of
my
those
god.
things. Because the reality is they will see their friends doing that, and they won't see them go to hellfire at that point. They won't see their destinies scattering, or at that point. So they're not able to, they just feel that mommy is not in sync with reality. So build values. Talk to them about delayed gratification. Use that to present abstinence. Than, oh, if you do this, then heaven will fall. Because the
Mm.
day they do it in error, they realize heaven doesn't fall. They just, oh, mommy's just old fashioned, or mommy's just, she's just who she is. So that's the kind of education that you have to give. Before 0 to 5, their body part at analogy is fine. As they begin to grow into the preteen stage, then you can begin to talk to them about their body, their emotions, how it works, and what to expect, and prepare them for the preteen, the adolescent stage. But if at any point, for whatever reason, your child has too much information, that is not age appropriate, you need to clarify at that point. At that point, you might just have to come out as straight as you can.
Mm. Thank you so much, Ibuku. You have said so much in so little time, and I'm here jotting. Of course, wahala for who no get jot at this time, oh. Because there is so much work to learn. Thank you for your wisdom, for the wisdom you're using in applying these questions. So having to teach children sexuality is hard work. I honestly,
It is hard work. Yes.
it's not a day lecture. It just continues
Yeah.
because it's according to their ages. Now I want to
Yeah.
know. It's interesting as we are talking about these things, right? Are there dangers to teaching sex education?
Okay. So you remember when we started, we talked about age appropriateness. Now,
Mm,
when you expose a child above the age, what you're doing is child abuse.
mm,
So yes, sexuality education has to be age appropriate. If it's not age appropriate, it's child abuse. That's actually the key. So yes, can there be can there be danger in giving sexuality education? If the sexuality education you give is not comprehensive, yes, then you pick the interest of your child, and your child can, in trying to find answers, then get it wrong. That's the danger in not giving comprehensive sexuality education, permit me. So it has to be age appropriate, and it has to be comprehensive. If it is not comprehensive, you will do more harm than good. And
wow,
it has
thank
to
you.
be the right information. For instance, let me cite this example. If you say to your child, maybe a girl that just hits puberty, and you say, oh, now that you started menstruating, which is the narrative for most African girls,
Parents.
once you start menstruating, no boy should touch you. If a boy touches you, you get pregnant. And a boy touches her, she doesn't get pregnant. You just lied, mommy. And so the boy will say, "Oh, okay. So if the boy comes to touch her and say, no, 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 don't touch me. Why? My mommy says I will be pregnant. I don't want to be pregnant now." I says, "No, that's not true. I just touched you. Are you not pregnant?" And say, "No." Aha, it doesn't work like that. You see, there's problem already brewing like coffee. So it's important that we give the appropriate education to our children. There is nothing wrong in telling your child a penis is a penis, because that's what it is. There is nothing like kokoro, there's nothing like tontolis, there's nothing like John Thomas. It's a body part,
These
and
tables
you
you are
should care
shaking,
for it.
there are parents standing on it. Oh.
Well, we need to shake it because it's a body part, just like the eyes, just like the mouth, just like the ears. And just as you care for your eyes, you have to learn to care for other parts of your body. Part of the care is protecting it. Part of it is not exposing it unduly. Part of caring for it is not letting, just like your eyes. Will you allow someone touch your eye, put hands into your eyes? No, you would not. Why? Because if you put hands into my eyes, you can damage my eyes. So, in the same vein, you shouldn't allow somebody inappropriately touch your vagina, because if they do that, they can, introduce germs. They can then, expose you to things you should not be exposed to. They can even cause you harm. So we need to give that education to our children, and of course, stop all the tontolis and the John Thomas and the all body parts are simply body parts.
All right, thank you so much. For those who don't understand, basically African parents use other words to describe certain parts of the body, like the penis
Parts.
and the vagina. So because you don't want to say it out to the child as it were, you just coin a name for them and then just generally describe it so that it's good to talk about it. But it's important that we call the names as it were. You're not ashamed to call your eyes, you're not ashamed to call your ears. So why are you afraid to call a penis or a vagina to a child? Just ensure that it is at the appropriate age. All right, our time is like far spent, but then I can't leave you without asking you that aside teaching, are there other ways that parents can educate their children, particularly for a society like ours? Just wrap up quickly in 1 minute.
Obedience has to come out of reference.
Hmm.
I don't just expect your children to comply without understanding why they should comply. So
Hmm.
teach your children values, teach them boundaries. Children need to have boundaries. These things are not acceptable. These things can be done now. You must have values in our house. In our house, we don't cheat. In our house, we don't do boyfriends in primary school. We don't do boyfriends in secondary school. Like, create value for yourself, the values in the house. And because when you talk about sexuality, you talk about the emotions, you talk about the psychology. So it's not just, like I said, not just the anatomy. Teach them to be assertive, to be able to say no, to place value on themselves. That's the easiest way to actually teach your child abstinence, beyond just saying, oh, no, don't have sex, or don't have a boyfriend, or this is the age to do this or date to do that. Help your children to place value on themselves. That's one. Then engage them. There's a lot of that word that says an idle hand is a devil's workshop or something. When our adolescents, when our children are not engaged, then they have time for irrelevances, and before you know it, they are into things that they shouldn't get into. So engage your children. Of course, age appropriateness also is key. Engage your children, engage their mind. Get them involved in sports, get them involved in vocation. Don't give time for idle time, of course, for irrelevances. So help them to create values, to place value on themselves, to learn assertiveness, to learn boundaries. Very, very key, that they know, okay, these things we don't do, these things are accepted and these things are not are acceptable.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ibukun. Thank you for the gift of your time and for your words of wisdom. You have not just spoken to us as a child's right advocate, you have also spoken to us as a parent. And honestly, it felt like this conversation shouldn't end. But I really want to thank you for coming. Like, you're awesome.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a
Yeah.
wonderful conversation.
Sure, thank you. All right, guys, thank you so much for sticking with us on the show today. You had a choice, but you chose to wait. It's Dr. Taiwo Show. It airs on YouTube and Facebook on Baobab Chats channel. If you're watching on YouTube, ensure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can get conversations like this and many more across Africa. I'm always grateful to the producer in the background who makes so much possible. Thank you so much. Till I come your way next time. Bye for now.